here.
Huh?
Right there.
Oh, that's the thing.
Uh,
I think he knows where to go. He had to go upstairs after lunch and get some stuff. Okay.
So you have had, I guess, well, prior to what he had, you all have had some tremendous experience in implementing, because one thing that we're doing, I can give you
Never wears.
how you doing? Okay, John Black Shield. All right.
They didn't have a blackboard, so that's the markers and that thing.
Good afternoon and welcome to this session of our conference, Initiating African and African American Studies in the Curriculum. Our presenter, we have two presenters. Our first and main presenter, Dr. Leonard Jeffries, and of course, unfortunately, that I did not have had not received his resume, but I did get these couple of notes, which I think is adequate to get us going. Dr. Jeffries is chairman of Black Studies, City University of New York. He's one of the founders of the African Heritage Studies Association, and of course he is also a founder of the study of classical classical African civilizations. So as we can see that he is a pioneer in this field, and certainly his presentation will overtake whatever it is we have. So Dr. Jefferson, will you just come on and present to us? We're waiting to hear
Do the right thing.
Do the right thing.
I'm not used to sitting, so I think I should stand. Hotep, brothers and sisters.
Okay.
It is certainly a pleasure for me to, am I being picked up properly with the mic? It's certainly a pleasure for me to be a part of this historic gathering in Atlanta. And for me, it has more than just the normal meaning that a conference such as this would have. Because Georgia is not only a special, dynamic place where Atlanta is the center, it is also where my roots are. On my father's side, the family traces its roots to Georgia, about an hour south of Atlanta. And on my mother's side, we trace those roots to Virginia. But of course, ultimately, when we trace those roots back to the roots of roots, we are in the African continent, the motherland. And as Dr. Ben has told us, we need to clarify even the roots of roots. Because I worked with Alex Haley for 7 years, was a major contributor of his work, the book Roots, and also the TV production of Roots. And one of the things that Dr. Yosef Ben-Yakin and Dr. Ben would always complain about was that Roots was an enormous phenomenon, but it took us to West Africa. And he was saying that if we really want to go to the roots of roots, we should go through West Africa, over North Africa, or Central Africa, and find the Nile Valley. Because the roots of the human family is found in the Nile. And Dr. Ben has taken the lead, and especially leading us to experience those roots. Many of us have been several times, and you may know, some of you, that we took a historic pilgrimage in 1987, with almost 1,000 of us going to the Nile Valley. In fact, many of the class of '87 are here. Can I see some hands of the class of '87? Wilfred Jones, Lionel, and Sister Adelaide. Several of us were able to be a part of that historic movement. This session culminates some of the work that you've been listening to, and I think it's an important one, so I'm glad that many of you are here. We have been laboring in the vineyards for many years to bring our people to the levels that we have experienced these last few days. There have been people such as Dr. Yosef Ben-Yakin who have been going to the Nile since 1938. When he went to the Nile in 38, as he has told many of us, he was a lone ranger. because most of us could not identify with the Nile. The Nile Valley had been taken out of the experience of African peoples and grafted onto Europe. But he has been a special beacon of light focusing on the significance of the Nile Valley. And so what we are doing today and what we have done over this last few years is the result of some of the foundations laid by him and others. Over the last 20 years, a brother who came out of the South, Georgia and Alabama, who spoke to us last night, Dr. John Henry Clark, and who is the master teacher who many of us have sat at his feet and still sit at his feet. Every time Dr. Clark speaks, I even tell our students, if he goes to the bathroom, get a mic. Do not let anything get lost on the historic experience of Dr. Clark. And so when he whispers or yawns, we have to catch him because of the significance of his message. So on these twin pillars, Dr. Ben, who focused us on the Nile, Dr. Clark, who had said for decades that we have to have an African vision, an African way, an African-centered perspective on the world in order to be able to create a new paradigm, a model of transformation for our people. These twin pillars of a vision of the speciality of the Nile, the special sacred role that it plays in human development, and John Clark and others saying that you have to have a vision that has an African value system, African interests, and African perspectives to see and understand what you are experiencing. I call it the African VIP, values, interests, and principles, in order to be able to digest the enormity of the African experience. But we need to understand fundamentally that these twin pillars that we have, these two beacons of light, have spread their message far and wide. It's in the Caribbean. It's in Brazil. It's in Mexico, places where Ivan Van Sertima and others have been. It's in Africa itself. In other words, the sons of Africa have brought a special light back to the African continent. It's in Europe, so that we get invitations to go to speak in London with the Hackney Black People's Association because this light is shining there. We get invitations to go to Paris to speak because this light is shining there. We get invitations to go to Switzerland where black people are shining this beacon of light. There's an extraordinary thing happening at this juncture of our history, and you are fortunate to be able to tap into it. You are fortunate to be able to tap into it because even people of greatness such as W.E.B. Du Bois and Edward Wilmot Blyden and Marcus Garvey, who had an enormous vision of Africa and had the strength to make it real, did not and do not have what you have. This explosion of knowledge with this technology that now exists, revealing all of the significance of the African factor in the world. And it's an enormity which cannot be fully dealt with even in sessions such as this. But it has to become a lifelong search, a process of re-education that we have to become involved in. But as we get into the significance of this transformative process, in other words, immersing ourselves in this African knowledge, scientific information of which is even in the NASA space program. That's why you can have a video with a NASA technician, star, superstar, narrating the history with information that Ivan Van Sertima was saying a few years ago he had been able to discern from different scholars, and now it's NASA's own representative speaking in a video form. And because this video technology is so significant, we now can spread it like wildfire among our people. So there is an enormous grassroots process taking place, as well as an intellectual process taking place, as well as those of us considering ourselves middle class being able to take it. It's covering the spectrum. As I stand on the street corner across from Morehouse looking for a cab, and somebody walks up to me that, you know, I'm kind of ready to get into my karate defense position, my martial arts defense posture, because I wasn't sure what was happening. And he said to me, you got your degree from overseas. And that didn't click. Somebody like that saying, you got your degree from overseas. And he said it again. And then I finally had to tune into what he was saying. And he was saying, well, you know, you were on Oprah. And then I realized what he was saying. I said, no, it was Geraldo. Dr. Naeem Akbar, Professor James Paul, and myself had the chance to be on the Geraldo show where we were dealing with the question of racism, the question of Africanness. And this brother, one of the ordinary dudes standing out in the street corner of Atlanta, had seen the program, and what registered in his mind was that you had mastered the European education even in Europe. You had mastered it in America, even in Europe, in their language of French. And so that had stuck in his mind. So I'm saying this knowledge now is out there. It is potentially transforming our people. Once this brother communicated with me, I dropped my karate posture. I knew he was a brother, and I knew he would be willing to defend me if anybody else came up that had untoward designs. So I'm saying that we need to tap into this knowledge. Black people have a basis now for true transformation in ways that you could not have imagined. And we're talking about the transformation not just of our educational institutions. We're talking about the total transformation of African peoples, creating an African way. That means transformation of our churches. We cannot go into the 21st century with the inherited European Christian church. An Africanization of the church with the spiritual force of African peoples, African Holy Ghost, if you will, at the center of what that church means. We cannot go into the 21st century if we're going to have a movement into this new paradigm, this new African model of transforming ourselves and helping to transform the world, if we go in with the traditional fraternal orders and sororal orders. I'm not putting any blame or any place, put any shoe on anybody's feet, but we have to have a fraternal system and a sororal system that has an African spirit, the African sacred science at its heart, the transformative processes spiritually that the Africans were trying to say was necessary when you institutionalize brotherhoods and sisterhoods. We cannot go into the 21st century and expect to achieve what we have to achieve with the fraternal systems and sororal systems that had the Greek center and the Greek paradigm at the heart of what is it that they do, and not the African spiritual transformation, which is what was the legacy that was laid down that the Greeks took and transformed. We cannot go into the 21st century with a school system based upon the European paradigm or European model of elitism, based upon a European paradigm, a European model of property and power and domination. It has to be transformed if it's going to be meaningful for anybody on this globe into a paradigm, a model which deals with the question of spiritual transformation, intellectual transformation. That's why when the sister held up this particular symbol and she mentioned it to you, she was saying this is a representation of the sacred science that combined, not separated, religiosity and spiritualism with science and technology. The Africans fused and created a synthesis of those two important elements, not dissect them and separate them, making them both mysteries so that they could not nurture those people who became involved in the process. And for the African, everybody became in the process because the process represented the core value system of African peoples, which is that life is sacred. The sacredness of life and the spirituality of all life, plant life, animal life, human life, unanimated life, man-made life. Life is sacred, so that all of it continues to be spiritually transformed and continually spiritually related. So that when children, for example, and that's why we need the other model, not only an African model of schooling, but an African model of family development. Nothing that we do institutionally will work. Nothing that we do in terms of our fraternal and sororal relationship, nothing that we do in terms of religious systems and spiritual development will work unless the family is part of that transformation. Key and crucial to any learning, the first level of learning and proper African socialization is the African family. And the key element of that is the mind of the African woman, because it's through the African woman that the transformation and the transmission of values has to take place. And so that transformation of the African woman's mind becomes key and crucial if we're going to be able to transform a people and lead humanity the way we have to. So that the family process is part of what we're talking about here this weekend. So it's not just schools. Schools will lead us to see the larger picture. Socialization, African socialization, has 5 basic units, just like any socialization. The first and fundamental unit of any socialization being how you get your beliefs, your role models, your patterns of behavior, how you become what you become. And we can be socialized positively into ourselves, and for us, that's our African selves. Or we can be socialized negatively out of ourselves, and for us, negative socialization would be being socialized within the context of the European paradigm or European model around European values, European perspectives, European desires, European interests. So we are asking for and saying that you cannot have any serious educational process that does not have an African socialization at the core of what is happening. So we have to have the families and the communities, particularly the mothers, involved in the process. African socialization within the context of family will let us know that, as Dr. Janetta Cole said, I am because we are. We are because I am. That we have to have a value system which is the 3 C's, I call it. The African value system centered around the three C's is communal, cooperative, and collective. At the center of this humanistic value system are things spiritual. At the opposite pole to this African value system, I call it the value system of some people, which comes out of an understanding scientifically and sacredly of the laws of the universe, which is the foundation of true spirituality, the harmony of everything in God's universe. At the opposite pole is that value system that comes out of the other branch of humankind, that's in direct contrast and direct conflict with the Sun People's branch of humankind. That's that humankind that was nurtured out of Africa, but found its way into Europe, unfortunately, in the 100,000 years ago when the Ice Age dominated Europe. So you have a transformation of African humanity nurtured and fired in the cold and ice of Europe, and that value system that emerges out of the caves of Europe is a value system centered around what I call the ice. I, individualism. C, competitivism. E, exploitationism. A value system dominated by materialism because of the lack of material beneficence in that ecology. A value system dominated by territoriality, dominated by greed, dominated by war and destruction, dominated by the male principle of physical domination and strength. And it's that value system that has been imposed upon the world, and particularly some people, particularly over these last 500 years. And we are trying to say we cannot go into the 21st century with that value system, because that value system of the domination of the caveman mentality and value system around caveman property interests has led us to the brink of destruction going into the 21st century. That we are about to pollute the seas, we are about to pollute the earth, we are about to pollute the air. Even the ozone layers are being destroyed by this value system of greed, death, war, and destruction. That the greatest value pollution that has occurred is the pollution of the mind. So Africans are calling for a transformation for us and all of us going into the 21st century, which will mean the initial transformation of the mind. And that transformation of mind is absolutely necessary so that we can see that we have to harmonize with nature and we don't have to pollute the seas. So we can see we can harmonize with nature and we do not have to base our energy source for the 21st century on the easiest way of getting profitability out of energy, nuclear energy, because nuclear energy, using the value system of death, is the most destructive energy source. We don't even know how to get rid of the nuclear waste when we have given in God's universe the greatest source of energy, which Africans held up as key to the symbolism of relating ourselves to the larger universe, which is the sun. We go into the 21st century with an energy source based upon that infinite resource, the sun, and not in the finite, deathly resource of the nuclear energy. So we have to. There's a larger dimension. It's not just schooling to prepare our children to be equal to white folks in their testing or the Japanese. We have to prepare our people to take the lead in the human family, to move at the front of the human family, to transform it. There's nothing left. There's nothing else at stake. I don't want to be equal. I don't want my nephew to be equal to white folks planning the destruction of the planet. We have to plan for the renewal of the human spirit into the 21st century. That means Africans have to move from the back burner, push everybody else off, including honorary dishonored whites such as the Japanese and others going for that profit mode, and move to the center of the human family with this inherited African value system, which goes back thousands of years. It's not something that just came out of the woods lately. It's something that has been the source of the raising up of humankind from the dawn of history. And every people, including the people of the northern realm, have gone south to get their light in order to raise themselves up out of barbarity. No one goes north to raise themselves up. Even Hitler had to reach south into the Indus Valley and take the symbol that became the swastika in order to give the Germans some ancient roots. They had no roots going north into their Nordic tradition. The Greeks had to go south in order to find the culture and civilization that would allow them to take their place among Europeans. 500 AD with their golden age to claim that they had a culture and civilization. The ancient Hebrews had to leave Mesopotamia with Abraham in Chaldea, Ur, and go into the south in the Nile Valley to tap into that sacred science of Africans in order to lay a foundation that allowed them to survive the hell and visits of destruction on them over these last couple of thousand years. And that same process has occurred within our Judeo-Christianity, that out of the African nexus of this sacred science and sacred philosophy has come the Judeo-Christian heritage that we nurture ourselves by. And we can't leave out Islam, because the Prophet Muhammad didn't reach north for anybody to help him structure a religious system to raise the Arabs out of barbarity. He reached into Ethiopia. Ethiopia stretched out its arms unto God, and he got Bilal and others to come into Arabia and structure a religious system based upon the sacred science and philosophy of the Africans to raise the Arabs. And once the fire and understanding of organizing yourself communally, cooperatively, and collectively took place when the Arabs invaded Egypt, and for 40 to 50 years put together that dynamic that allowed Islamic civilization to spread west all the way to West Africa, up into Europe, and spread east all the way into the islands of the Pacific after going through India, Pakistan, and Indonesia. We have to understand this historical dynamic. As Dr. Diop says, if we tap into the Nile, we will tap into the sacred science and philosophy which will allow us to create an operative scientific principle and process that will allow us to redo ourselves. So the call is not to go back some kufa and just grab what we can grab so we can put on dashikis and wear some medallions that symbolize our strength and wear a kufi with cowrie shells. The call is to go back and to tap into this enormous source of spiritual regeneration so that we can take our position of leadership in transforming. So the model, the paradigm that we're talking about is not just for school systems, it's not just for our children, it's for humanity. And we have to understand that the African call, the sacred mission, is not just something for us here in America. It was divine that we would be taken out of Africa and put into these hells of North America to fire us up so that we would have the strength to take on humanity and transform it. That's why Farrakhan and others can say we are the chosen people. Farrakhan wasn't the first to understand that. If we read the biblical traditions of the ancient Hebrews, we are the ancient Hebrews today in the 21st century, preparing for it. And we have to take our particular position around this value system that transformed others, and it can transform us. Dr. Diop understood this, one of our greatest minds. And I'm sure our brother Obadeli Williams will be mentioning that we cannot go into the 21st century with just Lubitsch's books. At the center of the African paradigm, even though this European did some fantastic work in understanding the sacred science, at the center of the African paradigm, a model for the resurrection of African humanity and some people has to be individuals, male and female, like Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop, who devoted his life to developing an understanding of what the Nile Valley civilization was. And he just did not spend all of his time in one particular temple or two to divine what mysteries were in that temple. He is talking about the connection with African peoples worldwide, that we are culturally unified and we have a cultural mission of resurrection and restoration of the Africanness. So when we're talking about beginning this process of putting things in place, we're talking about empowerment, empowerment of all of us. And we have to understand that that will be a difficult process because people will be threatened by it. And the threat will not only come from people that don't have melanin, it will come from our melanized leadership and elite, first and foremost. That's why Lister Milton is being attacked in this week by a black man who was put into a vice president managerial position so he could destroy the message that Listerfeld is now about to spread worldwide across our Sun People's realms. That's why they will take somebody black and come and attack Adil Noble, or somebody black to attack Regent Adelaide Sanford. So we have to be aware that the attack will come from all places, but at the core is the threat that we pose to this negative paradigm coming out of the ice, centered around the raising up of the Greeks and the worshiping of what I call the homosexual warrior value system, which Greece instituted, and which has been carried down through our Judeo-Christianity, that even the Pope today says that women have no place of significance in the church because they can't carry that spiritual mantle. Africans said in studying the laws of the universe, it's clear that women as well as men carry a spiritual mantle. In fact, if you look at spirituality, it is centered on the principle of the female nurturing life. So she epitomizes godliness. She is not eliminated from godliness. So the Africans of the Nile and Africans throughout Africa had women as well as men in positions of authority when it came to spirituality and religion. So we have to understand this inherited value system, this paradigm of the Greeks, which is that homosexual warrior value system. I know people don't like to hear that. Even Dr. Naeem Akbar said, well, maybe, Jeff, maybe we can discuss, we can call it monosexual warrior value system. No, I mean, I think we need to deal with it. It's the worship of men, for men, by men, around men, in men, dominating men. And even when women get caught up with that value system, they start acting like the homosexual warrior. You got one over there in England now, Mrs. Thatcher, they call her the Iron Iron Lady. She's operating just as Winston Churchill had operated. You had one in Israel called Golda Meir, and she operated just as Begin operated. You had one in India, Indira Gandhi, and she operated just as any despot might. We have to understand, it's not a question of gender, it's not a question of color, it's a question of the value system, and the inherited value system of the Africans is built around this central spirituality, around a value system of the 3 C's. We see each other communally, we understand and work with each other collectively, and we share together cooperatively. That's where the future has to be. So when we're talking about institutionalizing it on these various endeavors that we're embarked on, watch for the obstacles. If you want to institutionalize a Black Studies program in the TV networks that you're in, expect the obstacles. If you want to institute it in the public school system, expect the obstacles. I was just asked to come to help institute a program in Truman High School, supposedly a model high school in an educational park in New York City, Co-op City. And the Black students have demanded this. At least an active vanguard of 40 of them wanted these Black courses in African American and African history. But there are 2,000 students there. So the school is now thinking, well, maybe we can put these selective courses in. They are not, the leadership of the school, which is white, is not even thinking that this should be for everybody in the school, white or Black, because you cannot teach without self-esteem. That is clear for anybody who understands teaching. If self-esteem is not there, if love is not part of the chemistry, teaching does not take place. Something else is taking place, and we've called it miseducation. So we're saying institutionalize the program, but understand that you will be up against a political storm, because what we threaten is not just confusion. We threaten the overturn of a value system that has been institutionalized around white supremacy, white male supremacy, white male with property supremacy is the paradigm that emerges out of the Greeks, that emerges out of the so-called American founding fathers, that emerges out of the elitists of feudalism in England. That paradigm is what we are about and have to destroy if we're going to be able to put in place any of these other institutions that can nourish our people. So what we are saying, first and foremost, agitate, then be able to organize, then you can think about education. Because if you present the materials like the work of Dr. Cheikh Anta Diop and let it stand on its own, because the obstacles and the fear of the destruction of white supremacy, it can't stand on its own. You have to back it up by organization. You have to back it up by educating all people, including white folks. Luckily, when I was with this Truman High team of people, the principal of the school and the head of the social science, there was a superintendent of school who is also white. But I think he has served in the school system 29 years. He feels kind of guilty on what he allowed to happen for 29 years in terms of miseducation of our people and all people. And he knows he's going to see his maker one of these days. And so he feels that something has to be done positive. So he took my side when I challenged them that going with an African American course and an African course is not enough, and that maybe you need to also start with a third course, Blacks in Science, Ancient and Modern. And I held up Ivan Van Sertima's edited book on Blacks in Science, and I had the book on Black inventors. The principal of the school said, what do Black people have to do with science? Science is objective. There's nothing relating to science that would be, this is ethnic studies that you're talking about. And I had to challenge him. And then he was backed up by the head of the social studies. Yes, we want social studies. Don't worry about the science. And I had to challenge him. And luckily, the superintendent of the schools, Mr. Khalid, said, Jeffries is right. Dr. Jeffries is right. Whoever built the pyramids, and Africans built the pyramids, stands at the head of the human family in terms of science, technology, architecture, astronomy. And that if we're going to do something correct, we possibly need something in science as well as the introductory courses. So I'm saying, Black folks, don't go and start to introduce a slice or crumb of the action. Have a vision that will complete the whole layout, the whole process. You may not be capable of instituting or implementing immediately the whole process. But what we are trying to tell you here as we meet communally, cooperatively, and collectively together is that we have to envision a new world for ourselves into the 21st century if we have a mission. And so if you start with a course in a school, your larger vision is that that course will lead to other courses, that these other courses will lead to a transformation of the whole curriculum, that the whole curriculum will lead to beginning to develop people that are thinking and not people that are miseducated, and that we're talking about a transformation of the world. Nothing else is at stake. And so you may have to start small, but you can't settle for that small piece. And that can't be the main focus of your vision. As we move into seeing what we need to do, it needs to start at every level. Those of you who can start it at home today with your grandmother and the mothers and the younger people in your family, you start it today. Go home tomorrow after church and then talk about the African foundation of our Christian experience. Start it today. We can't on Monday celebrate Christopher Columbus or anybody that looked and acted like him. And that you need to take that day to get your family together, either in play or either around the table, and talk about the African factor in the world. Christopher Columbus represented that ICE value system, the homosexual warrior, and those homosexual warriors came with their armaments of steel and their swords and their axes and their guns, and they destroyed whole civilizations in their wake, enslaving whole peoples, millions of peoples called Africans. We have to understand that Christopher Columbus represents our death, not an elevation of African peoples. So if we're going to talk about anybody being a discoverer, then we need to talk about those people who discovered Christopher Columbus on their beach in the islands of the Caribbean. The Native Americans that are our cousins, the Sun people, and we need to pay homage to them and their resistance. And then we need to pay homage to those of us who came in those ships in a later period and resisted the genocidal process that had been put in place in the wake of Christopher Columbus and the Pope. The Catholic Church has to take direct responsibility for institutionalizing the slave system of Africans. So when we deal with the real deal on Monday, we need to tell the truth. We have nothing else to do but tell the truth. Our silence is a definite defamation of the tradition of struggle that our people come from. We have a call and a response to speak our special truth to the world. And as we institutionalize it, even on the little levels that we institutionalize it, understand that we're speaking a larger truth. Those of you who are in schools and you want to institute it, and the principal says it can't be done, you can institute it in your classroom. If they force you to teach the Greeks, teach that the Greeks worship the Africans, that the foundation of any Greek civilization is African, that Greek philosophy is African, that Greek writing systems, Greek heroes are Africans, that even Athena, who sprung from the head of Zeus, is given an African foundation in the traditions of the Greeks. And that all the great Greeks, Thales, Democritus, Hippocrates, Socrates, all of them had their roots going into the great lodge of Luxor on the Nile Valley. And so if you have to talk about architecture, and Greek architecture mentioned that they built a great temple to their war principle, the homosexual warrior principle on the Acropolis, the Parthenon. That's what it was. It wasn't a religious monument. It was a war memorial to the homosexual warrior value system. The Greek victory over the Persians at Marathon, 496, 495 BC. That's what the Acropolis and the Parthenon represents. There is no comparison with that temple of the Greeks and this temple of the Africans. This is the Epithet Waset temple, which was a temple of spiritual development, spiritual transformation. This is the paradigm or model that we have to have. It did not represent a war memorial. It represented the struggle of the human spirit to dominate the negative forces of the universe. So when you went into this great university system and temple learning the sacred science, you realized that you could be transformed from a lower level of animal instincts to a higher level of human instincts onto a godly level of godliness. Transformation by degrees through the 7 liberal arts and the secrets of African education. That's why we've got to dig deep and come up with a model. We can't take our youngsters to Washington, D.C. and tell them that look at the Pillared Temple that they have for Abraham Lincoln, the emancipator. Lincoln didn't emancipate a soul. The Emancipation Proclamation wasn't even a freedom document. If anything, it was a war measure to arm the Africans who had been prepared from the beginning of the struggle to fight for the freedom and save this nation. And they were told, get back, black. But then when the whites were in trouble and there was a stalemate north and south and it looked like the slaveocracy was going to dominate America and create 2 nations, then you go to black. Then they said, let's arm our black people. Let them save themselves and in the process save the nation. And that's what that process represents. So we don't need to look at Lincoln as an emancipator. We got Harriet Tubman as an emancipator. We got Frederick Douglass as an emancipator. These were the people who were conscious of a Lincoln. And he didn't have the courage to make the war a struggle against slavery without first looking like it had to be a victory of the northern armies over the southern armies. So we've got to teach our special truth to the world. You can't talk about the Civil War without talking about the spiritual power of Africans that transformed America America and made the American dream even reachable for those waves and waves of millions of Europeans that came after we laid this foundation, that said that the American dream was open to all people. And that's what our struggle represents in the Civil War. And it was the Italians and the Greeks and the Poles, the Russians and the Eastern European Jews that come later in the 1880s, 1890s, 1900s, and 1910 that sat upon the work that Africans had done in struggling to open up America. That's the truth that we have to teach. We have no other way to teach that truth. We can hide and cover it up, but we got to teach it. It has to shine. But if you do teach it, what does it do? It threatens you. It threatens your job. It threatens your security. But it elevates your psyche. It raises up your spirit. It makes you more godly. It pushes you in another realm of our people, like Frederick Douglass, who said, if there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess the favor of freedom yet deprecate agitation are men who want the crops without plowing out the ground. They want the rain without the thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. Power conceives nothing without a demand. It never did, it never will. Find out just what any people will quietly submit to, and you have found out the exact measure of injustice and wrong which will be visited upon them. And these will continue till they are resisted with either words or blows or both. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress. Now, that statement from an African who struggled out of slavery, beat back his master, could become the basis for a philosophical treatise, become the basis of a political science treatise, become the basis for understanding how economic and power go together, and the question of what is truly religion and the work of God. That statement alone. So we can take the tradition of the Europeans and transform it, but it has to be transformed by a particular truth. Expect the obstacles. The obstacles are there and everywhere. The greatest book that I know that has been written by any human up to this date, and I consider it our Bible. And I'm trying to tell black people, when it comes out and is published in English, make sure you take the King James Version of the Bible and your Quran and push it over to the side to make room for this at the night table near your bed, so that we can nurture our youngsters with this. Civilization or Barbarism by Dr. Cheikh Anta Diop. We may have to struggle to make sure that it sees the light of day. It has been published in French since 1981. It is now in the hands of publishers. Lawrence Hill had it, and he died. And his publishing house was bought by a conglomerate in Chicago. I fear, even though the book has been translated and they're working on it, John Clark has written the introduction, I fear that those people who understand what we're tapping into and the strength that it will give us to change the world may not let us see this book see the light of day. And there won't be any murmurs about it, just like they had that rusty whole debate over letting that book on the prophet emerge. When this book is squashed, there won't be any cries about censorship or anything, unless we make that move, unless we organize and agitate. So we need to understand our particular truth. Why? Because within the European context, they've made it clear for us. I always go to, when Camille Yarbrough, one of our sisters, said that in the theater, when they're in trouble, they have a saying, go to black. And that can mean several things. It can mean cut out the lights and try to fix what's happening on the stage. Or it can mean, economically, go to the black market. In other words, put on a black play or a black movie and let black folks come in the theater to save the theater. So when I need a situation and I'm in trouble, I go to white. Find some white scholars and white theoreticians and white scholarship and lay it out. And what I'm trying to tell you has been supported by generations of white scholars. What our scholar in Black Athenia is talking about is 200 years of the fabrication of the Greeks. The book Black Athenia has a value because it lays down a detailed analysis of 200 years, over the past 200 years, of the fabrication of a false prominence for Greece. So I always wipe it out with one paragraph. And this is a paragraph in the Catechism I think we need to raise our children up when we're talking about the African socialization at the family level, and then also talking about African socialization at the next unit, which is schools, and talking about African socialization at the next unit, which is the churches, and African socialization at the next unit, which is the peer development, and African socialization at the next unit, which is jobs and community. This is a book written by a white scholar or two, Dr. Joel Colton, a distinguished graduate of City College of New York, and Dr. R.R. Palmer, who's at Princeton University. Dr. Colton is at Duke University, and they wrote a book called A History of the Modern World. And I have made thousands of copies of this, and I circulate it wherever I go. Unfortunately, I didn't bring thousands down here for you. But in a chapter called Ancient Times, Greece, Rome, and Christianity He has a section called Before the Greeks, the Near East. And he starts off, and I tell my students, we read this together, and I tell them they need to take it home. Europeans were by no means the pioneers of human civilization. In fact, you all need to say that. There's something cathartic about expressing. Let me hear it. Europeans were by no means the pioneers of human civilization. Half of man's recorded history had passed before anyone in Europe could read or write. The priests of Egypt began to keep written records between 4000 and 3000 BC. But more than 2,000 years later, the poems of Homer were still being circulated in Greek city-states by word of mouth. Shortly after 3000 BC, while the pharaohs were building the first pyramids, Europeans were creating nothing more distinguished than huge garbage heaps. I think we had some confusion on that. Let's have it repeated. Europeans were creating nothing more distinguished than huge garbage heaps. Ironically, like the pyramids, they still endure and are known to archaeologists as kitchen middens. This is our special truth. This is written by a white scholar. Go to white. Go to white if you want to destroy a history of scholarship that's falsified and fabricated to Greece. Go to Black Athenian. But if you want to build a paradigm, a model that means the resurrection of African peoples, our linkage globally, then go to the Dr. Diop's. Go to the Dr. Ben's. Go to the Dr. Clark's. Go to those forums of African peoples like we've set up in the First World Alliance in New York. Go to organizations such as ASCAC. Go to leaders such as Asa Hilliard and those beautiful sisters that spoke today. Dr. Janetta Cole, do you know how many black presidents of colleges need to sit at this sister's feet? And she's only been there for a year, but she brings a special African spirit. Go to those young sisters who we saw put their thing on videos. Do you know this sister who did the video, Marjorie Chipwood, got into this thing. I sat with her for a lunch, this luncheon, and I said, a year, we've seen this change in you. She said, not Dr. Jeffries, it's not a year. It was last March. It is less than a year that I've tapped into this knowledge, this explosion of knowledge about African peoples, and I'm able to use my technological skills to create this manifestation of our special truth. So that's what it's all about, our brothers and sisters. It's about institutionalizing at every level, and we do not have to wait for boards of education to say we have to institute it. We do not have to wait for university systems to say we have to institute it, because the stake that they have bought into is the stake of worshiping and revering and maintaining the big lie of white supremacy. So as you move into your levels of struggle, understand that you have to agitate, educate, and organize, that you can't go it by yourself. And if you have a frustration of dealing with it in the institutional settings of the public school systems, or in your community centers, or in your high schools, or in your colleges, then go to Black. Go to your homes. Call the people that seem to be interested to meet with you on a regular basis in study groups in your homes. You have to tap into this knowledge and information, which is your spiritual transformation. You can't die on the vine. Teaching is a sacred profession. Involved in teaching is something that has to happen. It has to start with our people in their homes. We can't wait to the institutional setting to have it start. We can't wait to try to do it on the colleges. In the colleges, there's such an investment in the Greeks that anything we present will be distorted, twisted around, and become polluted. But since our people are in numbers in these institutions, we have an obligation to make it real for them. We have to create, and if I can have 2 minutes, we have to create what I call an African synthesis. And this explosion of knowledge is such that even Dr. J, myself, has trouble keeping up with the flow of information. It's coming everywhere. Whenever Asa does anything, I'm there to hear it. Because what he did 6 months ago, he's revised and expanded. Whatever Listerfeld does, he's added some more materials. It is that which is happening, and you've been lucky and blessed to be at this juncture of your history to have this. But to organize it, I came up with what I call pyramid consciousness. We have to take back the pyramids. Those myths and misconceptions we have about ancient Hebrews building the pyramids, we have to put to rest. The Africans of the Nile built the pyramids to their God concept. No mythological people, Jews or otherwise, no people from the chariot of gods built the pyramids, and whoever built the pyramids stands at the head of the human family in terms of the sacred science and philosophy. So we have to develop what I call pyramid consciousness in order to be able to deal with this enormity of information and this transformation that we're talking about. Pyramid consciousness and analysis will allow us to look at what I call the thesis of information and data. That's the basic data around African peoples, Sun peoples. It is the original data. It is the most significant data. It goes back eons of years, millions of years, to the African foundation of the human family. It goes back 100,000 years to that rapid revolution 100,000 years ago when Africans learned to domesticate fire, plants and animals, learned to live in settled communities, learned to study the laws of the universe and lay the foundation for the human family. This is the data that we had to have as the foundation for any serious knowledge and understanding and education. Then we have to go to the opposite pole. In the law of nature, there are opposites. In the human family, there's the negative and positive. There's the male and female. There's the life and death. And the opposite pole for us is the experience of the ice. The opposite pole of us is the European-American experience that has been imposed upon Sun people around the globe. And it's this data on the European-American which we have to master and understand, but we have to put it in conjunction with the data on the African Sun people's experience. Then we have to make our call to our people to move to the top of the pyramid, to create a synthesis of the positive and a synthesis of the negative, a synthesis of the greatness of African culture and civilization, African glory, and a synthesis of the enslavement and the destruction of the African mind. And we have to move to the top of the pyramid in a spiritual quest to become thinking Africans, thinking African VIPs. Not very important Africans, but Africans who understand their values, Africans who understand their interests, Africans who understand their principles. And so this is what we tell the students. We can help you develop this area because if you do not have it, you cannot possibly fit within this dynamic. This area comes out of the culture, it comes out of the TV, the newspaper, the magazines, the videos, the school system. You have to put this particular truth in conjunction with this particular big lie, and it's that level of truth that you will accept, which is the thinking that you will develop. We can't go to the top of the pyramid with the individual students and people we work with. They have to go to the top of the pyramid themselves. So they have to tap into their particular strength, which comes from their African genes. And what we hope to create is not an Afropean, because an Afropean was somebody who synthesizes on this side. We don't want to create, we want to create a new African. An African who understands his values, his interests, and his principles. We're not talking about a new African American. We're not talking about a new African Caribbean. We're talking about a new African who synthesizes this greatness and this enormity, who understands this defamation of African peoples and creates a new mind based upon African humanity and spiritualism which can liberate the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Jeff.